Are you on the fence, no pun intended, on whether you should take on the challenge of building your own fence or shell out a few $1,000s for someone else to do it? I'll show you not only how to build the fence from scratch, but also how to build a sturdy gate that won't sag and how to stain your fence so it can last for decades. Well, I'm here to show you that you don't need any experience, except for a PhD, a post hole digger. Unholster that impact drill and let's get started. The first thing we need to do is string a line indicating where to place the fence. My line will represent where to place the edge of my posts. When determining where to place your line, use a property survey to determine proper placement, especially if you have a neighbor that may have a difference of opinion on how much land is actually theirs. Mark where you want to dig your holes, and as a rule of thumb, you want to make the diameter of the hole 3 times the size of your posts. For 4x4 posts, the holes will be 12 inches in diameter. The front corner post will be a 4x6 for added strength. That hole will be 18 inches in diameter. I know it's a little bit overkill, but I want these posts to be strong. I space the holes 90 inches apart if possible. That way an 8-foot section of lumber could fit in with no issue. As mentioned before, I do have a PhD. That way I have something to fall back on if this YouTube thing doesn't pan out. And here it is, a post hole digger. I'm also using a tamper to compact the bottom of the hole after digging. For the dirt you dig out, I placed mine on a tarp and moved it to an area of the yard that needed to be filled. Or you could even advertise that you have free dirt and someone could pick it up. Now before you start digging, hold on just a second. This is very important. Make sure to call 811 or go to their website, call811.com. You do not want to start digging and hit a gas line, electrical line, or worse, cut the wire to your internet and have the kids whining all day. They are quick to respond and it's free. They will mark all the utility lines and all you have to do is mark your holes with white paint to show them where you plan to dig. After they come out and mark everything, adjust your holes if necessary and then start digging. One time I didn't contact 811 and almost cut through the internet cable wire. After a closer inspection, it was the internet wire, but it didn't cut through, which I was very thankful. So please go online and contact 811. It will be a lifesaver. Now it is possible to rent an auger from the big box store to dig your holes. Depending on what type of soil you have, it could be a lot easier than digging by hand. In my case, I have clay soil, and if I were to use an auger, you would have to constantly clean it because clay soil sticks. A powered auger can also be very powerful, and it could hurt you if you're not careful, or strong enough to handle it. Just take your time, take a break here and there, and you'll get through digging your holes with no problem. To determine the depth, I painted a white stripe at 2 feet deep on the post hole digger. That way I don't have to keep checking it every time. We had been dealing with a lot of rain lately and the holes filled up with water. More than what I needed. What I did is use my wet vacuum and suck all the water out. I saved the big hole for last, which is where I'll be using the 4x6 post. This is the corner post where the gate will hang, and I want it to be strong so it won't sag. The hole will be 18 inches in diameter and 30 inches deep. Now this is my first mistake. If you're using your line to mark where you want the edge of your post to be, don't mark the center of your hole using the string line. If you do that, then your post will be in the center of the line. Mark the center of your hole by subtracting half the width of your post and you'll have the post centered with the hole. I ended up having to scrape off a few inches off the side of each hole because there was more concrete on one side than the other. This is the 4x6 that I'll be using. It's 12 feet long, but they didn't have any 10-footers, so I'll just have to cut it off a little later. I'm using the high-strength Quikrete instead of the Rapid set due to the price. This is $3 less per bag compared to the Rapid set. And I'm not in any hurry. Make sure to wear a mask when using the concrete, and we'll also need some water. After digging the hole, make sure to compact it with that steel tamper I showed you earlier. I usually pour half a bag of concrete on the bottom of the hole. This acts as an adjustable surface to get the post nice and level. Pour the rest of the bag in and add a little water. Pour in another bag and do the same thing. Get a shovel or a long wooden pole to mix the concrete the best you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. The water will migrate deep into the concrete along with the moisture from the ground, and it'll harden up with no issue. Now, not necessary, but it makes life a whole lot easier. Get a post level, that way you don't have to keep using a standard level and you can see both sides at the same time. Simply wrap it around and adjust the post if necessary. In my case, I want the post to lean up against the string line without pushing it forward. If it is, get a big hammer and move it over a bit until you get it in the right place. Repeat the concrete and water mixture and keep mixing. In total for this deep of a hole, I use 9 bags of concrete. For all the other posts, I use 3.5. And for all your posts, keep checking to see if they're still level. Once we got close to the top, we switched from a pole to a small shovel and a trowel. For the final layer, we mixed up some concrete in a wheelbarrow and shoveled it on top. The point of this final layer is that you want to build it up and slope it away from the posts. That way water will flow away and not cause the post to rot, which is the #1 cause of fences failing. This is the perfect angle that you want. I'll show you a little later that I got a little too happy with the concrete and made it a little bigger than I should have. After getting the first post in, I'm going to let that set up overnight and start tomorrow on the rest of the posts. I went ahead and got the next post in. The rest of the posts will be 8 foot long 4x4s. I have exactly 6 foot of post sticking out since the hole was 2 feet deep. Perfect. I measured 6 feet on the first post and placed a mark along with a screw. On the other end, I also placed a screw and tied a string to it. You can tie up the string many ways. What I did is make a loop and twist 5 times. Place it over the screw and grab both ends of the string. What you're doing is pulling both strings opposite to each other, getting all the slack out. Once you're done, pull the string that is not connected to anything and pull it towards the screw. It will collapse on itself and it won't go anywhere. Now the string will act as a guide to make sure all the posts are at the same height. I got 2 more posts in the ground, and you may have noticed this piece of wood here. If you're working by yourself or want to keep a post level, simply cut a 2x4, pre-drill a hole, and screw it into your posts. It will help keep your posts from moving around, but with holes these deep, I didn't have an issue. Keep repeating the process with your holes. Add some concrete on the bottom, and if your post comes up a little short to your string, simply add some more concrete. Adjust and level your posts. Once you get to the top, mix some concrete in a bucket or a wheelbarrow. Add some water and mix it up. It's kind of like making a cake. This is the consistency that you're looking for. Hand shovel it on top. I used a trowel dipped in water to help smooth out the concrete. Now this is where I got a little concrete happy. I made the mound a little too high, which interfered with me placing my footers to place the pickets on. It was okay. I made it work, and I'll show you what I did a little later to fix it. Now that you have all your posts in, let's move on to installing the middle rail. I decided to do these first since it was easier to work on and it would keep the post spaced evenly. Here's a tip. When determining where to place the middle rail, do not measure from the top to the bottom of a naked post. You must include the top rail, which I just placed a scrap 2x4 on the top, and also include the footer along with a spacer if you decide to use one. My measurement came to 64 inches and half of that is 32, and I marked a line. My middle rail will be a 2x4, which is 3.5 inches wide. Half of that is 1.75 inches. I marked a line to show where to place the top of the 2x4. Get the 2x4 and adjust it to the line. Grab a clamp to act as an extra hand. Place a level on top and adjust the other side. Mark a line to show how far you want your 2x4 to be if you're using a thicker piece of lumber like this. I'm using a 4x6, which is 5.5 inches wide. All my other posts are 4x4s, which are 3.5 inches. What I should have done to keep everything straight is move the 2x4 2 inches in. So just keep that in mind if you decide to use similar pieces of lumber. On the other end, mark the 2x4 where it will be cut. Once the wood is cut, you now have exposed the wood that has not been chemically treated, and here's the solution. This is pretty much the same liquid that is used when pressure treating wood to keep it from rotting and being affected by insects. Definitely use safety glasses, gloves, and work in a well-ventilated area. This stuff is corrosive and can cause blindness, so please be careful. Remove the red top and plastic cap. Place the red top back on and pull up to reveal the spout. I poured mine into a glass jar and I used a disposable brush. All you have to do is brush it on, let it soak in, and you're done. I'll be using 4-inch deck screws for most of this project. Get a scrap 2x4 to mark a line. Place 2 screws on that line and use the same for the other side. This helps to keep the wood from moving around when you attach it. You can also hammer it in a bit so it can be flush with the 4x4. Attach a clamp and mark a line 1.25 inch from the edge. You can also just use a finger knuckle if you don't have your tape measure handy. Extend the line towards the front. This is the proper distance to toenail a screw. After you determine the rail is level, grab your drill and start off straight. Once it bites, angle the drill at 45 degrees and go all the way through. Screw in the screws, but not all the way just yet. This is to keep the other side from pulling away too far from the post. Remove the 2 screws from the back and toenail 1 screw. You may need to press the screw in a bit to get the right angle so it won't pop out the front of your post. Screw in the rest of the screws and now tighten all of them up. When starting the next one, simply mark a straight line using the previous rail since we know that was level. Now just keep working your way down on the rest of the fence. Now that we have all our middle rails installed, here's another tip. At the end of my fence, I had to raise these 2 rails since this part of the yard slopes upward. This means the footer was higher compared to the others. And remember, you have to measure from the top rail to the top of the bottom footer. Now it's time to work on the footers. This is where we will place the pickets on, and it makes your fence about 6 inches taller. Before we begin, I'm going to string a line as a guide for our footers. I placed a 1/2 inch spacer so the footer would not rest directly on the concrete. Tie a string line and do the same for the other side. I placed a scrap 2x4 to extend the line out so I can place footers in between without an issue. I'm going to start with the front of the fence, and I'm using 2x6 boards. I have them clamped up along with 1/2 inch spacers, and everything is level. Now another mistake I made was not recess this part of the board in a little bit since I'm using a 4x6. If you leave it in the way it is, it will look a little weird and extend outward. So I unscrewed it and brought it in 1/2 inch. As you can see, the middle rail was fixed as well. When installing the footers, place a 2x6 down on top of your spacers, adjust the board until it's level, and clamp it down. Mark the middle of the 4x4 and transfer that line to the footer. As you can see, you don't need a fancy work surface to build this fence. Cut your board to size and seal it up. Place it back down, and when it's level, pre-drill and screw it in. Repeat the process all the way down. Now here's why I said not to make your concrete mounds too high. If you do, you will encounter this problem. The footers will not lay flush, but this is easily fixed. Simply mark the curved line, and you could use a compass if you want it to be exact. Use a jigsaw to cut out the curve and place your board down and screw it in. Here's the part where the ground slopes upward. What I did was clamp a level 2x6 and measured one end and the other. I also subtracted the 1/2 inch clearance from the bottom. I measured the length and cut it. I'll be using a 2x12 for this footer. I marked the 5.5 inch measurement on one side and 10.5 inch on the other. Grab a straight edge or a leftover piece of wood and connect the dots. Take your time and cut it. Place it down for a test fit and we have the right angle. Mark the curves, cut them out, and if you have a slope in your yard, this is definitely an option. This part of the yard that slopes up a bit, I just dug out a shallow trench so the 2x6 could fit a little better. Now for the last footer. I did have to chop up an old tree stump to get it to fit just right. I was glad the stump was pretty much rotted out, so it made things real easy. After that, I was able to screw in pieces of wood so I could attach the footer and bottom rail to the existing fence. Speaking of the bottom rail, let's go ahead and install it. It's pretty much the same process as the middle rail. Place the board down, mark it, cut it, and seal it. Place the board back down, and what I did was use a 1/2 inch spacer. Place it on the bottom and adjust the board if necessary. It should be a tight fit and not move very much. Pre-drill some holes and toenail the screws on both sides. Once all of them are in, go ahead and tighten all the screws up. Toenail a screw on the back of both sides and remove your spacers for the next ones. Now we can start working on the top rail, which is going to rest on top of each post. After putting in the first two, let me show you how to install them. It's pretty straightforward, but here's another tip. Whenever you use a piece of lumber, most will have a slight bow to it. The bottom part where it cups should face down. If it's placed facing up, the lumber will continue to droop in that direction, causing sagging in your fence. So place the top of the crown facing up to resist sagging. Place the 2x4 on top and eyeball the middle of the 4x4. Mark it, cut it, and seal it as usual. Place it on top, and in my case, I needed a step ladder. Pre-drill 2 holes at an angle and screw in 2 4-inch screws on each side. Put up a couple of more rails and we can start bringing the fence to life. It's time to install the pickets. Since my fence has different heights of footers, start with the lowest one. Place your picket on top and make sure it's level. It should be since the footer is level, but you just want to make sure. If using screws, it's very important to pre-drill a hole so you won't crack the pickets. Me personally, I think screws make the fence stronger and you won't have to worry about nails backing out in the future. It does take longer, but I think it's totally worth it. I'll be using 2-inch screws. The next footer is slightly higher and I want the top of the pickets to be even. Flip the picket upside down and draw a line matching the top of the previous picket. Cut that part off and of course you guessed it, seal it up. If you happen to have a helper, take all the help you can get. This is my good seasoning dealer whom is featured in almost all my Texas sidewalk recipes. Check them out if you want a great laugh. All located in the playlist on my channel. Now once we came across the next footer, we encountered a small issue. We decided instead of cutting a thin piece of picket, we would just cut out a notch. Place the picket on top of the footer and tight against the previous picket. Mark a line at the edge of the footer and trace it up with a triangle or a straight edge. Bring the picket down and strike a line using the top of the higher footer. Mark an X to show what we're cutting out. Use a circular saw, jigsaw, or a handsaw and cut out the notch. And lo and behold, it fits perfectly. Keep repeating the process and we are halfway done. Sometimes you have to flip the boards around so they can sit tight against the previous picket. Keep on pre-drilling your holes and screw in your screws. Whenever you're putting your pickets up, they'll usually have a tag attached with a staple. Pull them out so they won't interfere with the height when you place them down. Now on to the last rail. This is where I'll have to cut off a piece of the last post. Place a clamp on one side as a helping hand and place your board on top. Level it out and mark a line. This is where we'll cut the 4x6. Use a straight edge and strike a line on all 4 sides. Use a circular saw set at the deepest cutting setting and take your time and cut through. Or if you practice karate, give it a chop. Hi-ya! The last picket had to be cut to fit. All you have to do is place the picket you want flat against the previous one. Grab another picket and slide it flush with the post. Scribe along the edge and you have the exact measurement to fit any space. Take your time and follow the line. Check to see how it fits. If it's a tight fit, then you did good. Go ahead and screw it in. I did notice at the top that it didn't look right. I took it off and notched the top to match the rest of the pickets. Now go back, pre-drill holes, and screw in screws. I only placed 1 screw on top and the bottom to hold them in place. Now you can enjoy the fruits of your labor and have a fence. Perfectly straight as if an architect drew up the plans. The next step will be to build a gate. Take a quick break and I'll be right back to start on that gate. Every fence needs a gate. And this is the gate right before we stain it, which I'll show you how to do a little later. And if you were able to build a fence, you'll have no problem building this gate that will never sag, which will make Grandma wonder what's the secret. Well, I may not be able to help Grandma out, but in order to build this gate, the first parts we will cut are the top and bottom rails, which will be 2x6s. They'll be joined together with half-lap joints, which are extremely strong when glued and screwed. Since the half-lap joint will cross with a 2x4, grab a scrap piece, flush it up with the edge, and mark a line. Keep in mind that any 2x lumber is 1.5 inches wide. Half of that is 3/4 of an inch. Set your blade at 3/4 of an inch and place it right on the line. After that, make multiple cuts about 1/4 inch apart. Next, grab a hammer and start knocking out the slices of wood. This is a great time to let out your frustrations. Get a sharp chisel and cut out the remaining pieces. Also start smoothing out the bottom of the half-lap joint the best you can. I know it looks like a lot of work, but trust me, this joint will last a long time and make your gate so much stronger. As long as your blade is sharp, it will cut out the small bumps of wood left over with no problem. Just take your time and get it as flat as you can. After you finish, measure out the length of the side rail, which will be 42.5 inches long. Please feel free to adjust any measurements to fit your needs. Now just repeat the same process on the other side to make the half-lap joint. Once done, place the finished piece on top of the next section of 2x6 and cut it out. Don't use your measuring tape if you don't have to. The next parts will be the side rails, which are 2x4s. This time get a scrap piece of 2x6, place it flush on the edge and strike a line. Repeat the process and making the other half of the half-lap joint. With these type of joints, we'll be gluing them and bolting them together with carriage bolts. This type of joint allows for more surface area for the glue to adhere and keeps the lumber's thickness uniform for your project. The length of the side rails will be 64 inches. I should have made them a little longer, but the way I'm showing you how to make the gate is the same regardless of the length that you choose. Now, if you happen to have a table saw, let me show you how you can avoid the chisel work and get the wood real smooth and flat. You can use dado blades to make the joints, but I don't have any. Use the combination square or any type of gauge set at 3/4 of an inch and adjust the blade of your table saw. What I'll be doing is simply moving the wood over the blade back and forth. Keep your piece as level as possible so you don't tip the wood down and cut off more than you wanted. I use the end of the joint as a stop and focus on moving the wood over the center of the blade, which is the highest point. As you can see, this came out beautiful and professional. It'll also save you a bunch of time. Plus, you get to use another power tool. Just be careful. Gather all your boards and fit them roughly together. It does help to have a large flat surface, but feel free to use the ground if it's flat enough if you don't have a large table or a couple of sawhorses. Next, we're going to get the gate square. Use a triangle, combination square, a framer square, or just 2 pieces of wood joined together. After it's square, clamp it down so it won't move. If a corner is out of square, just give it a nudge until the triangle fits snugly in the corner. Here's a closer look. If the triangle is able to move back and forth, move the gate until it fits like a glove in the corner. Once you got everything squared up, it's time to glue it up. I decided to use a waterproof wood glue, but I've heard other people use the polyurethane glue. Lift up a board, being careful not to bump anything out of alignment. You can fix it right after you place your glue down. Pour the glue all over and saturate it good. I've used this glue outdoors and never had an issue with it. Once it cures, it'll be stronger than the wood itself. Do the same with the other side. Place your board on top and check for square. Clamp each corner down so both sides of the joint can adhere to each other. This is called squeeze out, and it ensures that you made a good connection. Here's another way you can check to see if your project is square. Grab a tape measure and measure from one corner to the other. I have 76 3/4 of an inch. Measure the next corner, and if it's square, you should have the same measurement. I would say that's close enough. While the glue is setting, I decided to place 1 screw in each corner to ensure the connection was strong. I pre-drilled a hole and screwed in a 1.5 inch screw. You think you have a good connection with just the clamp, but as you can see, once you screw in a screw, more glue was able to squeeze out. That lets you know that a particular area was not pressed together as much as it should be. Do the same for the other corners, and I let my gate sit overnight so it can cure. The next day is here, and it's time to cut out the middle brace. This diagonal brace will be the most important part to keep your gate from sagging. If your hinges are on this side, the diagonal piece must be installed where the high point is facing opposite of the hinges. If your hinges were on this side and the diagonal piece was kept in the same direction, the gate would start to sag and get worse each day. Here's a visual on what I'm talking about. If your brace is installed correctly, the gate has what is called compression strength. When gravity comes into play, along with the weight of your pickets, it can withstand compression forces without a problem. If the brace is facing the wrong way, now the gate is under tension and barely has any strength to hold itself up. So make sure to install the brace correctly or you'll regret it every day that the gate sags. All you need to do is eyeball the 2x4, and once you get it in place, mark your lines. Cut the notches out, and if you remember, seal the exposed cuts. I forgot, but I think it'll be alright. Test fit your piece, and wouldn't you know it, fits perfectly, and I didn't even use a tape measure. Pre-drill some holes at an angle and toenail 4-inch screws on both sides. You're more than welcome to glue these together, but you don't have to. For added strength, I'm going to use 3/8 inch galvanized carriage bolts that are 3 inches long with a washer. Drill 3/8 inch holes in each corner. The top of the carriage bolt is rounded, and if I place my hinge on top, it won't sit flush. I'll use a forstner bit to create a recess so the bolt can sit below the wood. I didn't realize I needed to do this until after the fact. What you should do is drill out the recess first or the bit will wander around. It's not a huge deal, just start off slow, and once it bites, you can drill down about 1/4 inch. Place the bolt in, and you may have to hammer it in a bit. It will recess itself lower once you tighten the bolt. Place the washer down and hand tighten the bolt. To tighten them, I'm using a ratchet with a 9/16 deep socket, or you could use a wrench of the same size. Tighten it down until you hear that slight crushing sound of the wood. Now the hinge fit over the bolt with no issue. I was actually thinking of using this type of hinge, the one that you can get at the big box store as a kit, which includes everything you need. But I decided to go with something else. I will use some parts from the kit, but I decided to use a more heavy-duty hinge that I got from Harbor Freight, and it was only $4. They're galvanized, and when compared to the ones from the big box store, they are a lot thicker, and should have no issue holding up this gate. To attach the hinge to the gate, I'll be using 2-inch lag screws. Before we do that, let's install the first couple of pickets. My line will tell me where to place the picket, that way the top of it will be at the same level as the pickets on the fence. To come up with that measurement, take into account the height of your fence and clearance you want from the ground to the bottom of your gate. Clamp it down and butt up the next picket right next to it. Pre-drill some holes and screw them in. Next, line up your hinge in the middle of the top rail. Use the punch to mark your holes where you'll pre-drill. Make sure to double check that you have your hinges on the side that you want. Use a drill bit that is slightly smaller than your screw. I'm using my impact drill to get the screws started, and I'll use my ratchet to fine-tune the bolt just where I want it. The footer will be one of the fence pickets. Line it up with the marks that you made and tighten down the next hinge. Cut the end flush with the edge. With my gate, I wanted 4 inches of clearance from the bottom. I plan on pouring the walkway and want enough clearance for the gate to clear. I'm using a 3.5-inch piece of wood lifted up another 1/2 inch. I leveled it out, that way I can rest the gate on the wood and the gate will be at the correct height. Manhandle the gate in place, and it's actually around 500 pounds, but that's usually my warm-up when I'm pumping iron. Here's a word of advice. If you have to leave and get something, lean your gate against a stable surface so the wind doesn't blow it down. I didn't, and the wind blew my gate down, landing on my good tripod. If you wish to donate to the channel so I can get a new tripod, hit that Super Thanks button or hit me up on Cash App. Or just simply leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Everything I do is for you. Alright, moving on. Line up your hinge and use a punch to mark your first hole. Go ahead and pre-drill it. I'm using a 5/16 lag screw that are 2 inches long with stainless steel washers. I was thinking of changing them out for longer ones, but after a couple of months I haven't noticed any sagging in the gate, so they're plenty strong. Plumb the gate to get it level and screw in one screw, that way the gate can hang freely. The gate already feels sturdy and well built. Nothing like working with your hands. Alright, go ahead and pre-drill the rest of the holes on your hinges and screw in your lag screws. The next thing I needed to do was attach a piece of 2x4 to my house so I can install the catch for the gate latch system. This is real easy. Mark 2 lines where you want to drill, and you want to drill into the brick, not the mortar. I'm using 1/4-inch concrete screws that are 3 1/4 inches long. Super simple to use and have instructions on the back. I'll use a 5/16 socket to screw them in. First, drill through the wood just enough to create a mark on the brick. Once you're done with that, switch out to a masonry bit. And not absolutely necessary, but I highly recommend using a drill with a hammer setting. The reason I chose 3 1/4 screws was because my 2x4 is 1.5 inches wide, and I wanted to drill the screw 1.5 inches into the brick. The instructions also state to drill 1/4 inch further, so that's how I got the 3 1/4 inch measurement. I know it seems like a lot of numbers, but basically what I'm saying is just drill into the brick. When I started drilling, I forgot that parts of the brick do have hollow areas inside, and I drilled right through, but no problem at all. Tighten the screw just enough so it can poke out through the other side. That way you can line up the hole with the screw. Tighten it up and it's not going anywhere. Plumb up the post and repeat the process. You just learned how to drill into brick, there's nothing to it and no need to feel intimidated. When closing the gate, there is enough clearance, but the house doesn't seem to be plumb, so it angles out a bit. There are a lot of foundation issues in my neighborhood, so I just have to keep an eye on it. To install the latch, I measured 4 feet from the ground. Mark the top and bottom and also mark your holes. Pre-drill and screw in your latch screws from the gate kit. Give them a 1/4 turn once they're tight. The latch is simple. Pull back the switch and the latch cannot move. Move it forward and it unlocks. Now it's time to install the actual latch that will keep our gate closed and locked. First we need to install a picket, and I'm sure by this time into the video you're already a pro at it, so I'm not even going to explain it. Once installed, get your latch and slide it into the catch. Level it out by eye and mark a hole. I'm using the small lag screw that came with the kit just to attach it, but I'll switch it out a little later with the carriage bolt. I decided to add a couple of pieces of wood to act as structure to screw in the latch and the pickets. Super easy. Grab a scrap piece of 2x4, level it out, and mark out the angle that you need. Cut it out, and it's a perfect fit. Pre-drill a few holes and screw them in. I'm using 4-inch screws. We're almost done. We just need to install the final pickets, and once we got to the last picket, I had to cut it to size. All I did was measure the width of the top and the bottom. I connected the dots, cut it, and it fits like your favorite shirt that got shrunk in the dryer. Nice and tight. I cut another piece of 2x4, that way I could screw in the pickets in on the bottom. Remember I said earlier I was going to change these screws out. They are a bit short and I wanted a little extra security. Remove the screw and drill out a 3/8 inch hole. Pop in your carriage bolt and do the same for the other side. I don't want the bolts to stick out too much, so I'm going to use a forstner bit to make a recess hole, just like I did earlier. I keep forgetting to drill a smaller hole so there isn't an issue with the bit wandering around. But like I said before, just go slow and it'll catch. Place your washer in and tighten your bolts. Now the last piece of the entire fence is to install the handle. Pre-drill a couple of holes and screw in your screws. We are now done with the gate, which opens beautifully and still does after a few months later after filming this video. Now you just spent all this time building the fence, and you want it to last, right? Don't go anywhere just yet. Let me go get my stuff so we can stain our fence that we just built together. If you stuck around this far, thank you very much. What we need to do is wash off any dirt or mud that has gotten on our fence so the stain can penetrate the wood. It's mostly contained to the footer. I'll be using a pressure washer, but you could use a water hose along with a brush. Before you stain your fence, you not only want to make sure it's clean, but equally important is you want the wood dry. If you live in a warm climate like I do in Texas, this should take only a few days. To test it, simply sprinkle some water on the wood, and if the wood absorbs it, then it's dry enough. If it beads up, then the wood is still wet. If you're pressure washing on a sunny day, it should only take about 30 minutes to an hour for the wood to be dry again. Just keep knocking off any mud that you see. To stain the fence, you can definitely use a roller, a brush, or even a pump sprayer. But what I prefer is to use an electric airless sprayer. I've had this for years and it's fantastic. You can adjust the spray setting and hold it in any direction and it'll spray without a problem. It comes with a blue pump fluid to keep the pump lubricated when stored, and it also cleans it out when you're done spraying or painting. I'll show you how to do that a little later. This is the dial where you can adjust how much stain or paint you want flying out of this machine. The main nozzle can be adjusted in any direction. This handle switches the sprayer from the spray mode to the flush mode. It makes the nozzle larger in case you need to flush the sprayer. The stain that I'm going to use is by Ready Seal, and it's a natural cedar color. It's basically foolproof and it'll leave no runs or streaks, and you won't notice any overlap marks. Most importantly, it's water resistant and blocks UV rays, which deteriorates the wood over time. I use this on the fence I have on the other side of my house. This was applied 3 years ago and it's still holding up very well. Whenever you're spraying paint, you want to be careful with overspray. My neighbor's house is just a few feet from the fence. I'll use this plastic barrier that has tape on it to cover her windows and anything that may get stain on it. It's very simple to use. Stretch out the width that you need, and it also has a built-in cutter. The plastic sheeting was only 2 feet long, so I added another layer halfway. If you got a favorite song that you like to dance to, ask your bucket of stain for a dance and give it a good shake. Pull up the top to reveal the spout and pour it into your container. Screw on the container nice and tight. After that, flip the priming lever down and pull the trigger for 10 seconds. This primes the pump with stain. Flip the prime lever back up and you're good to go. Before we start spraying, make sure to protect yourself by wearing safety glasses and a mask. Here I'm just experimenting with the setting to see which one will be the best. I started with the 4, but later on changed it to 3. I was just going through too much stain real fast. Start from the top or bottom and have your sprayer about 6 to 8 inches away. Have a nice steady pace, not too fast and not too slow. This will be the first coat of 2. It's pretty straightforward. A good time to clear your mind a bit, listen to a podcast or some music. While you watch me spray, I'm going to give you a short story on this fence. We have lived here for 14 years without one. Before we moved in, it was blown down by a hurricane and never rebuilt. We didn't mind it for a while until our neighbors started to bring their huge dogs over. We were terrified whenever we were outside and they ran out to take a dump. We could never sit in the backyard and relax in peace. I'll tell you the rest of the story in just a bit. Here I'm just making sure that the stain is not getting on my neighbor's house, which it wasn't. Here's a quick tip. Whenever you plug something into an extension cord, tie it up just like this. That way when you pull on your cord, it won't become disconnected. While I'm doing this, let me discuss the benefits of staining the fence. As you can tell from the part of the fence that hasn't been stained yet, it can be very bright when the sun hits it. Staining the fence reduces the glare and is more comfortable for the eyes. Staining also stops potential rot, which will slowly eat away at your fence and cause it to fail. And you've worked too hard to let it crumble in front of your eyes. It also keeps bugs from using your fence as food and of course blocks the sun's UV rays. The sun is very damaging, and if left untreated, it will cause your wood to dry out and crack. And last but not least, staining the fence makes it look good. So to finish the story about the fence, I was met with a little pushback from the neighbor due to property line issues and the fact that she did not want a fence. Long story short, I initially dug the holes right on the property line where she had a problem with. So I decided to avoid all issues, I moved my fence over 8 inches toward my property. That way the fence is all mine and the neighbor can't say anything about it. So I redug the holes and this video is the result. And me and my family are so glad that we don't have to worry about dogs no more. No more having to step in crap. Now that we have the first coat on, if you like this shade of the stain, feel free to leave it alone. If you want it a bit darker, let it dry for 1 hour and repeat the process. I decided to add a second coat, but I won't bore you with more clips of me staining the fence, which is just a repeat of the exact same process we did for the first coat. Whenever you notice the cut in the video when using the sprayer, that was just me refilling the container. That way you can get an idea of how many pickets I can spray before having to refill. I didn't film me staining the back of the fence, but I assure you I did, and it's the exact same process. Once you're done, it's time to clean up. Pour the leftover stain you have back in your bucket. Since our stain is oil-based, use some mineral spirits and pour some into the container. Place the sprayer back on and prime it up. Flip your prime lever up and use this knob to switch back and forth from flush to spray to get all the leftover stain out of the pump. Remove the plastic container and pour the fluid into a glass jar. Let it sit and all the stain will fall to the bottom. That way you can reuse the clear mineral spirits that flow to the top. Wipe the inside of the container and now we can flush the pump with the Blue Armor pump fluid. Get the bottle that came with the sprayer and place it where the siphon tube connects. Flip the prime lever down and if you look closely you can see the leftover stain come out of the sprayer. There it is. Keep squeezing the bottle until clear blue fluid comes out. Place the siphon tube back on and your sprayer will be corrosion free until the next time you decide to use it. And just by looking at my sprayer, I'm sure it'll be called for duty again soon. We just finished staining our fence and I have to say it looks amazing. It's been 14 years we have lived here without a fence and I can't believe we finally got one by doing it ourselves. Now you might be wondering, was all this hard work worth it and how much did it come out to? Before we get to that, here's a quick recap. We started by stringing a line, we dug our own holes, you watched me place the first post in the ground, we pre-drilled and screwed 6 screws in each picket, which is around 175 total. We practiced some karate, built a sturdy gate that will not sag, and we stained the fence so it can last for decades. The total price for everything was $1,400. I got some quotes and it would have been between $1,500 to $2,000 just for the labor. It was a 70-foot fence and would have cost $300 to $3,500 just for someone else to do it. I'll try and list everything I used including the prices in the description box. You just saved around $2,000 by doing it yourself, and you can be proud every day you look at it. If you have any questions or comments, let me know in the comments section. I always reply to everyone. This was a long video to film and edit, and I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe I've encouraged you to take on this project yourself. No experience needed. If you stayed this long, thank you for being a loyal viewer. I really appreciate it. I'll see you on the next video, and as always, have a blessed day.